Welcome to Postmortem. I am Kipi Kashubowski, and this is the podcast where we take apart the life of a book or a piece of long-form writing from first spark to last page, including the messy, difficult, and often untold parts of the process. Today, I'm talking with a really good friend, Iris Jamahl Dunkle, poet, essayist, and award-winning biographer. Her latest book, Riding Like the Wind, tells the story of Sanora Babb, a novelist, memoirist, and poet who chronicled the Dust Bowl from inside the migrant camps, only to have her field notes appropriated by John Steinbeck, who wrote The Grapes of Wrath. We'll talk about what it means to write a recovery biography, a book that restores the voice of someone who history has nearly erased. This takes us inside the archives of the Harry Ransom Center, out into landscapes Babb called home, and through the piecing her life together from letters, photographs, and fragments. Along the way, we dig into archival violence, the ethics of blending fact with scene-driven storytelling, and the surprising ways poetry, place, and physical endurance fuel her work. This is a conversation about literary excavation, resilience, and the devotion it takes to bring one person's life into full view, vividly and on the page. This is a really good conversation, so here we go. Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. I've been spending some more time with your book, Riding Like the Wind.
Oh,
I found a section in the book that later I'll bring up if it pertains to our conversation. But for this video series called Postmortem, it's like looking analytically at how this book became to being from like beginning to end, and like what worked, what didn't work. It's interesting to hear what did not work because that's not often talked about, or like the really difficult parts were that you had to like keep readjusting to. So that's what we're going to do with this. Like, you've had really incredible interviews about your process and you as a poet and a biographer and the book itself. But I really want to learn from you how to write a biography. Not that it can be recreated one-to-one, but so my first question, or like where we can start, is how did the story come to you? How did you know this was the story that you were going to commit a lot of energy toward?
So I love this question. It's one I've been asked a lot. And the first time I encountered Sonora Babb was through Ken Burns' documentary, The Dust Bowl, which is an extraordinary documentary. I think it's 4 hours long. And when I watched it, there's this cameo that she makes, and her book, whose names are unknown, is mentioned. And so I was immediately drawn to that because my grandmother came over in the Dust Bowl and had hated The Grapes of Wrath. And I'd never really found a book that I thought really recreated the Dust Bowl in a way that my grandmother had told the story. So I immediately got her book. I read it. It was incredible. And so I started like Googling her, and just really doing some initial research. And I found out on her website that she was also a poet. And she wrote all these short stories, and I was just like, oh my gosh, she sounds amazing. So I filled out a form on the website. In that form went to this woman named Joanne Deerkop. And she was not only Sonora Babb's literary executor, she was also her good friend. And so she heard me say, I'm really interested. I'm a biographer. I'm really interested in learning more about Babb. And she was like, ding, ding, ding. And she reached out to me immediately and was like, hi, let me send you this book. Let me send you that book. And so I started reading her other work. And Joanne was doing a project with the University of Oklahoma Press where they were pulling together all these academic essays on Sonora Babb's work. And she's like, we do have a missing article that needs to be written. And since you're reading everything she's doing right now, maybe you'd be interested. And so I wrote an article about her short fiction for that collection. And it really it was just kind of in the beginning of a biography project. You're just reading across. You're trying to find an entry into the narrative. And you have it's happened with both, well, I'll say all because I have future biographies I'm going to write. But with each of my subjects, I have this moment of encounter with them where I know I need to tell their story. And usually, given that I'm a feminist, it's something that is amending the loss of their voice. And so that happened with Sonora Babb. And because of her friend, I immediately got sucked in and had access to a lot of material.
So, what about her writing made it worthwhile or exciting for you?
So Sonora Babb, who is known as a fiction writer um, and memoirist, wrote in this really sensory rich way that because I'm also a cross genre writer, I saw encountered her on the page. I saw this intense connection to the senses, and so you're immediately drawn into the dugout where they're living in eastern Colorado, and you can smell the dirt and you can hear the geese flying overhead. And for me, I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. And then the other part is that in her stories, women have agency and they're often the protagonist. And in the 90s, when her book was written, and in her short stories and other books before that, that wasn't common. And so I'm always looking for that point of view. So that really kind of lit up in my brain that she was a voice we really needed to.
Yeah. So, how long was this period when you like in the forum on the website to writing the intro about her fiction? Like, how much time had passed between that?
Like 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, not a lot of time.
Okay.
I get kind of obsessive really fast.
Yeah, I love that. But I'm really curious about what else was happening in your life that you had to juggle in order to start
Mm.
this journey, whether you knew how long it was going to be or not. Like, was there another project going? I know you're a teacher as well, professor.
Yeah, no, I was teaching full time plus, I would say. So
Yeah.
I teach multiple institutions. At this time, my kids were still in high school, so I was juggling that,
Yeah.
and I was writing. I was working on. I'm a poet, so I'm always writing poetry. Um, but I didn't have. I had finished another biography that was published in 2020, and so this was just around the time that that was coming out. So I was looking for a new project,
Okay.
and the pandemic was coming, but I didn't know it.
Yeah. Okay. So what month was it and what year did you send out that first message?
So it was in 2019 that I was in contact with Joanne, and I started working on this in the winter of, I believe, 2019 to 2020. And
Okay.
I did my first research trip to the Harry Ransom Center where all of her collections are, and it shut down while I was there. So that was March 2020.
Okay. This is so important to the context for sure because the book, I should say, Writing Like the Wind came out October 2024, right?
Yes,
Okay.
last
So
October.
the process is about 4.5 years of beginning and like putting out into the world this really thick, really well researched book. That's incredible to me, and like this is why I want to talk to you about like how like what happened then. Pandemic hit, there was vacancies in lots of people's lives. Like how did you then pursue the next step of this biography? Or did
Well,
you
once
know that you were doing that yet?
Yeah, no, I knew right away that I was going to be working on Babb, that I was going to write a biography. I started to try to find funding, which I was not successful finding,
Yeah.
but I did. I was juggling, with like everyone during the pandemic, I was juggling my kids being at home and teaching. I actually, as a professor, we taught more and we were doing more work than
Yeah.
before, and so I was pretty overwhelmed the first few months, and then I was able to start, like, the Harry Ransom Center was closed, but they would send me, once they were scanning, they would send me information. During that summer, um, the big battle, the big conflict in the book is that Sonora Babb's notes that she took while she was working at the camps for refugees from the Dust Bowl were appropriated and used by John Steinbeck when he was writing The Grapes of Wrath. And so I knew, for me, as somebody who grew up on Steinbeck, I grew up in California and I read Steinbeck since I was a child. And he was my favorite. Like, the East of Eden is still one of my favorite novels. And so that was the thing I had to conquer in myself, and I had to conquer in the book first, even though it was going to happen in the middle of the book.
Yeah.
And so that summer, I published a lot with this beautiful literary magazine called Catamaran that's out of Santa Cruz, California, and they're my friends. And so I knew that I could send them a piece of shit writing and they would be honest with me. And they'd be like, I'd go back and work on that, or you know what I mean? And so because it was so terrifying to write this first chapter, that's what I did is I committed to them that that fall I would be sending them a draft of this sample chapter, right? So I was basically trying to figure out how to make a book proposal because I knew I
Yeah.
needed to do that. And so I wrote that first chapter about Sonora Babb's meeting with Steinbeck and handing over her notes. And, my knowledge was pretty sparse. It was what I could get at that time,
Yeah.
but it was a beginning and I could imagine it. So for me, I enter a story through an image, and for me, I was entering through this camp near Bakersfield where she was in a tent cabin like structure on a typewriter typing this book, which I loved, whose names are unknown. And so once I could like physically be in that space in my brain, then I could engage with this conflict of the story. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I sent them the draft and they were like, okay, and they sent back edits, which was great. And that was published that winter. So that's in Catamaran in that issue. But that's when I realized I was starting to get my feet under me and I was ready to begin the project.
Yeah. Okay, so getting into the body, getting into the scene for sure. So do you know the moment that you found out or who told you that her notes were used for Steinbeck's novel?
Yeah, so I had heard rumors of that um before. Like I had heard, I mean, it's not like I discovered this news. Um,
Yeah.
Someone had told me, oh yeah, Steinbeck appropriated content or, stole content throughout his life, but from the Grapes of Wrath. And I was like, okay, whatever. But Ken Burns makes it pretty clear in the documentary that that's what happened. And so but when I started talking to Joanne about it, she was kind of sheepish about stating that, as was Sonora Babb towards the end of her life, because it's not something you want to go up against as a titan like that.
Right.
It's a way to ruin your career as a woman that's been forgotten. So it's understandable that she really wanted me to not make Sonora Babb into a victim, just as my grandmother didn't want to be a victim. And so the most important thing that I was doing in that kind of figuring out the arc and narrative of the book, which we can talk about, but like was to make sure that it wasn't about just Sonora Babb being, as they said in the first draft of the title, done dirty.
Yeah.
It was her empowering an amazing story of her life, and that just happened to happen to her in the middle of the story, but it wasn't the defining factor. Of course it became a hook in marketing, but the book is not just about that.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting that you've heard rumors of it for forever, and then yeah, Ken Burns' documentary helped you. Like, I was just wondering if that was a moment of like, okay, here is what we're gonna circle everything around, and but you said like you were still finding information about her. Okay, I kind of want to step out of timeline a little bit,
Okay.
and I want
Well,
to ask you like, what was that?
I said, what is time?
Yeah, yeah. Life is fast and short. I'm curious about strategies that you use. So like let's go to writing the first chapter. I know that you're sharing it with friends and they're giving you notes and they're letting you know if it's crap or not. But like what does it actually look like? What's the first thing that you write down, or like how do you sketch it? Do you paint it? Like what do you do in that moment when the book is still kind of like foggy in
Nebulous.
front of you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I start with, when you write biography, at least for me, I start with a timeline, which is like a giant Word document where I start sticking in facts as I find them along the way. Now at the end, it's over 500 pages long, but in the beginning, it's just a date and a fact and trying to take notes and remind myself to cite things, because otherwise your life sucks in the end. But that's how it begins. But from that, I start, like, for me, I knew I wanted to do a cradle to grave. So that means I was going to begin a little bit before her birth and then and just with an epilogue after her death. So I knew that was my arc. My last biography was a little different, and I started in medias res and then went back and then met with that point again later. Um, and so I knew that was the way I was going to approach it. And I started writing that first chapter, and it really is, I had let go of the Steinbeck chapter already, put it to bed, knowing that I was going to come back to it probably a
Okay.
million times. And so I started with the first chapter, which is about, it starts like when she's like, well, I mean, it started from the beginning when her parents met. That's how I started writing it. And I started doing all the research of Eastern Colorado during that era, and Red Rock, Oklahoma, which is where the story begins. And so I visited Red Rock, and I went to look up the land grant applications, and I went to the Otoa Missouri Reservation and the Indigenous History Museum that's in Oklahoma City. And I went and investigated these places. Like, I went on the ground to look at where the old buildings existed, and a lot of really great, I was able to do a lot of really great, interesting beginning research through these little tiny historical societies like the Cherokee Strip Museum, which is up in northern Oklahoma. And I just connected with some of the women that, it's always women that work there. And they would send me like these typed up documents, the early history of Red Rock, and these photographs, and just a lot of really valuable information that is not accessible anywhere else. So you really have to be on the ground there to find hidden stories. And I was lucky that I had been doing a reading at University of Oklahoma, and this guy Todd, who runs uh, their Western literature collection, kind of gave me all of these tips on where to go and what to look for as I drove north. And they rented me a car, so I was on like, I was really lucky to have like a full day's research kind of in the bag. So that's kind of how it began. And I started writing that chapter. I wrote it at Vermont Studio Center, and I was there for 2 weeks, I believe, 3 weeks, for 3 weeks. And it took me that long to write it. But at the same time, I'd already begun this empowerment process that I had to do through this whole writing this whole book. Is kind of to take on my inhibitions about writing about Steinbeck by doing an erasure project. So
Yeah.
that's when I started doing an erasure of the Grapes of Wrath. And so I was kind of doing that concurrently, beginning with chapter 1. So that began right in the beginning of this process.
I remember being on a Zoom with you when you showed us what you were doing. So it's okay, very interesting to place that in time as a witness. So you were at the Vermont Center and there were empowerment. What do you mean by empowerment process? Is that a thing or
No, I just call it that. So,
okay.
um, I think erasure is a way to get your power back. So when you
Yeah.
feel like your voice, or in my case, my grandmother's voice was speaking to me.
Hmm.
I wasn't gonna bring her voice into the biography I was writing, but her story, which I knew very well, kept coming up in my brain as I was trying to write Sonora's story. And so I knew that I needed to take it back from the Grapes of Wrath. And so that's when I started doing this erasure. So kind of
Yeah.
writing her story, Sonora's story, and my family's story on top of his pages in poems.
That's amazing. And then yeah, I imagine that being like the emotional what's the best word for that? Like emotionally channeling or emotionally accessing
Yeah.
the story of Sonora. Like even yeah, okay, very cool. Okay, from here, you wrote the first chapter. Was that on paper with your hand or was it typed when you first went into it?
That was typed. My notes, though, are on paper. So, like,
Okay.
I have journals that have all of my quotations. I mean, I have this timeline where that's master timeline, but I have like notes with all the quotations. But I also have like this is from Eastern Colorado. This is some of the grasses. This is a
Wow.
stone that I found. So, like, physical objects from the place. Like when I visited where her dugout was, which I literally laid on the ground so I could smell the dirt. and look up the sky so I could see what it looked like to her. And I was really lucky that the people that own the property, because it's, it's being farmed right now. They let me do that, and they took me to all the places where she had lived, and all of the, all these lost towns that were there. Their graveyards are still
Yeah.
there, so they took me to the graveyards, which was just extraordinary. But having all of that physical experience in my body made it so that I could recreate what that place looked like in the early 1900s.
Yeah, I'm becoming even more aware of how you are a Western person. Like, you are so aware of California, where she lived much of her life, and the other parts of Western America. So yeah, your writing is so detailed, but in that way that it feels like a poem. We're there with you, and the scene work. I think it's time to read the passage because I'm really curious as a poet myself. Like, how do you fact check a scene? Like, okay, so this is on page 142 in chapter 9.
Okay.
It's the last paragraph. And there's a lot of examples I could have used, but this just came out. Okay, so this paragraph says, one night in Paris, after a long dinner and far too many drinks, willfully flexed her independence, and in response, Hal lashed out, resurrecting all their past disagreements. Hal's temper exploded, and they got into such a loud verbal fight in public that Babb, furious, left Paris immediately and returned to England. When she walked into the London flat, she found the phone in its little nook was already ringing out into the empty apartment. It was Hal begging her to come back to Paris. He was sorry. He hadn't meant it. He wanted her to give him another chance. After thinking it over, Babb did go back. And I'll stop there. But how how do you fact check such an incredible passage of narration?
So I can give you a collage of things around this that'll kind of put that together for you. So
Yeah.
there are letters that she would write to her friends and to her sister about things that went down. So this fight she recorded in a letter. I don't remember who it was to. And she recorded his temper through many different, examples.
Yeah.
I had photographs of the inside of their apartment. So I knew there was a little nook where the
Yeah.
telephone was. So I could see what that was. So I could imagine that place. And she had complained about in the letter to her sister about other people hearing their argument or, something like that. And they talked about this fight after the fact as well in letters. So it was recreated through their own telling,
Yeah.
but I just use it as a way because I believe that writing scene-based biography is the most effective way to bring people into the story.
Yeah.
Because I'm bringing people back to life. I don't want I don't want to keep people away from the scene. I want them in it. I want them to feel
Yeah.
like Senora's their friend by the end.
Yeah, and so much time passing in such few sentences. It's that moment where she's walking in and the phone is already ringing. It just felt so dazzling to me that, like, I trusted you as a biographer that this is what happened because you illustrated it and also you demonstrated throughout the book up to that point that there's so many details and like where you found the details, and it's like you knew them as friends in that, like, I could tell you what my best friend's like scene with her partner would have been like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do.
Yeah.
And I think that was what was most meaningful at the end of this is to meet, to have Joanne read, Joanne was her best friend, to read this manuscript and be like, you got it, like you got her. And even more
Yeah.
so having Roxana, who was her adopted daughter, read it and tell me, she gave me this beautiful bracelet of Sonora's and told me, she would approve of what you wrote. And that's like every biographer's dream. I was like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
I can retire.
And to have living people who knew her well to tell you
Yeah,
that, like, that feels like an important part of the process. The like
it is,
checks.
tricky. And it's tricky when you have living people because
Yeah.
their idea of a person is not the same as who the person really was. And so it's actually harder to write about people that have children that are still alive or partners that are still alive,
Yeah.
because their version of that person is not what you're going to be writing.
Yeah. Especially when they're an executor, you know? Like they have the power to stop
Yeah.
a project.
I was
Yeah.
terrified to have Joanne read it, but she liked it, thank God.
Have you actually been in a situation where someone stopped one of your projects?
Yes and no. So yes, my first biography started off as co-authoring with someone, and that person was a scholar. And so, I am a creative writer first over a scholar. And so my vision of how to write, we wrote the first chapter together, the first, like, I'd say 15 pages together. And my vision of what that writing looked like versus hers was so night and day that we had to separate because I didn't want to write a book like her and she didn't want to write a book like me.
Yeah.
And so that hindered my process. But even trying, and we had a publisher at that point that dropped us because he wanted a scholarly edition, and I was like, no, I'm going to write this like a novel, but it's going to be a biography. I want it to be scene based, and I had a very clear vision of it. And he was he didn't like it, so he dropped me. So it took me a while to find a new publisher, but
Yeah.
I did.
Which book was this?
That's Charmian Kittredge London,
Okay.
Trailblazer Author Adventure.
Yeah. It's a beautiful book. I'm very glad that you knew how you wanted to tell the story.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think I can write any other way. So
Yeah, and I will admit I am not a major biography reader, but reading your biography, it felt like what I like to read, which is like more like, yeah, living beings in scenes. So yeah, I loved it. Okay,
I know.
and now
I
let's
mean,
talk about.
but that's important to bring up. It's the reason why I did that is because this is, you're trying to bring back somebody's voice who's been forgotten. And if you keep it
Yeah,
locked up in a little scholarly, box, you're never going to reach a wide audience. So I was like, well, no, I want this to be very accessible.
yeah, and her being a writer as well, and her writing also being like alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's yeah, a very good fit. Okay, what's another thing that is not often talked about when we're talking to a biographer? Like what's a strategy you did to get through like the harder, longer moments of writing this book?
Well, let's see. I think, some of these strategies. I'm a big deadline person. So to have deadlines for when I was going to finish a chapter was very helpful. Um, when I was thinking about the shape of a chapter, my friend would help me maybe choose a tarot card that would give me um, an idea. Like, for example, the chapter about Mexico City, I think the tarot card was Laguna, Lacuna or something like that. I'm not sure. It was something like a cave. It was a cave. It was a cave. And
Cool.
so, right, that image became this like guiding principle for the chapter. And it was
Yeah,
this like central image of that chapter with, you know, Sonora is facing writing content about her father. She's been exiled from America because she's trying to save her husband, James Wong Howe, from being called to the stand. Oh, she was trying to get not be called to the stand for the Un-American Activities Committee, and so she's living in Mexico City. But she's also that chapter's about her kind of dealing with the deep trauma that she had of being abused by her father,
yeah,
and at the end of that chapter, he dies and she immediately has a heart attack. And so it is like a cave of like it was such a perfect pool because it's just
yeah,
the structure of that chapter it was this cave of isolation, this cave of like reiteration and renewal was on the other side of it, but she had to get out of that cave. And it was an extraordinary thing to have that guide me through that process because every chapter was really hard, but that's why it's so fun, you know.
yeah. Do you remember, did you feel kind of like, well, how am I even going to write this chapter? And then that card gave
Yeah.
you like the opening. Okay.
Yeah, for
Was I there
sure.
for that? I was there for
You
that.
did. You gave me the
Okay.
card.
It was me. Okay. I was like, was that me? I think that was
I
me.
was trying to be all sly about it, but yeah, you pulled that card. It was great. You guys helped a lot on that chapter. So full disclosure, like
Yeah.
we worked on that chapter together. You read
Well,
it and
you
heard it.
you worked on it.
I worked on it. You guys heard it for me and listened to it to me read it again and
Yeah.
again.
That's like one of the best ways for my writing as well, is like meeting with like a small group of people, or it can be a large group, but like small group or intimate group, I think is important.
Yeah.
We like state an intention, or we say like what we're working on or what's our question, and maybe there's a little bit discussion and then timed writing, and then you have to come back and share whether it's crap or not. Like that's the best for me, especially with writing prose.
Me too. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think, I mean, it's tricky with biography because you have to have periods of research and processing of research. So
Yeah.
I have to be like ready for that session, but there's so much also with biography, like reiterate, like going back through and putting stuff in and layering, information
Yeah.
on top. So you're kind of like, it's kind of like you're building a wire figure first, and then
Yeah.
putting on the muscles, or the putty to make a muscle, or it really is. That's the way I see a chapter. It comes from like this core wire image or idea, and then it comes out, like you build on top of it as you go.
Yeah. And like you've done, I don't know how many research trips, right? So like every research trip, you were getting like another flood of details. Maybe want to talk about that a bit. Like how do you plan a research trip? I know they're all different, but
Yeah.
like, how do you go about
Yeah.
it?
So a lot of my research trips, I mean, there's two different kinds of research trips that I went on. The one I would do most often would be to go to Austin, Texas, to the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas at Austin, where they keep her collection, and there's 74 boxes, I believe. So I would have in advance, I would have like a list of either, I would do it per chapter. So I would have like a slate of questions, research questions I was trying to answer. And I've already like gone through the archives before I go, and I have pulled certain things that I know are going to possibly have answers. And so when I walk in that door, the librarians have already gone and pulled up boxes for me, and I'm ready to go. But the reality is, like, being in an archive, even if you know it well, is like fumbling around in the dark in a dark room with not being able to see. And so you have to be always open and adaptable as you're reading and discovering, as to what paths it will lead to. So I was hoping I had my research book with me, but I don't seem to have it right here. But it's a hardbound notebook that I would bring with me in there, and I'd write in pencil, and then I would like add facts, like, because I'll be looking for one answer and I'll find another, right? So I would add it to the timeline, and I'd add it to my notes, and I take photographs of everything. And there's never enough time if you're working in the area that I'm working in, which unfortunately is an area that is underfunded and getting more underfunded every day. You do not have the opportunity to be there a whole month and just kind of leisurely go through the archive. And it makes me honestly so angry when I hear about a lot of my male white colleagues, who are writing books about male white authors or figures, and they are like luxuriously spending time in these archives, not to
Yeah.
be upset, like not to be like, mean, but if the funding was there for women to do the research on female authors in the same way,
Yeah.
we would have so much more material. We'd have so many more intimate and interesting biographies, not to mention the page count you're given by the publisher. Like, I was given 100,000 words, no more, even though I went over, but don't tell. And you see these, like, it's an extraordinary thing that, say, Heather Clark got to write Red Comet, which is such a tome of 1,000 pages, right? But she had to make a lot of deals to get that. So it's a very tricky thing in the biography world as to who gets access to the archives and for how long. And, in Plath's case, which is, I'm just working on an article about Plath and Lowell right now, Amy Lowell, to get access, you have to go through the Hughes family, and so if you are going to be saying things that they don't like, you have limited access.
I'm really curious about that, but I don't want to jeopardize a future project. of yours. That is like, but that comment of like who allows people in, how expensive it is. Just like
Mhm.
the fact that you have to fly somewhere and stay somewhere overnight, many nights hopefully, in order to have the energy and the time to look at the archives. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's you
Biography
get
is no joke.
it's no joke. You have to, it was funny. I'm in this new phase of my life where I'm dating, and I was on a date with this guy he's a tour guide and he lives out of his van, which, was a little bit, I was like, I don't know. But we were talking about like being on the road because it was the first time I could talk to someone like really plainly about what it's like to be a biographer on the road. And it
Yeah,
literally is you're living off of like bagged lettuce and like
yeah,
perfect burgers or whatever you can put in your suitcase that will not go bad because you will not have a refrigerator. You'll be living, I would rent a car and kind of like live out of that car and maybe stay the night at people's houses or the cheapest hotel I could find. Or I wasn't living out of my van, but the guy that lived out of the van was like the first person that was like, oh yeah, I do that too, you know?
yeah. So I
But
didn't know
yeah,
that about you. Like, yeah, now I'm having like an even more badass image of your process. And I know
yeah, it wouldn't
it's
be as
not
badass
accessible.
if I had a little more funding, I would say. I would probably stay in
Right.
a hotel and
And you
eat it.
should, because it takes so much brain power to focus. Like, yeah, anything to
And
allow
I
you
mean,
to do that.
in all honesty, when I'm on a research trip, I am not thinking about eating very much,
Yeah,
and I have to make myself, when I'm at the Harry Ransom Center, I do have like you don't eat during the day because you can't, like, you only have so much time. So, like, you
yeah,
eat, you caffeinate, and you can't bring anything in, even water. And so you
okay.
try not to drink water because then you have to go pee anyways, like it's just literally 8 hours of just research. And then I'll go like, I will take like a half an hour break and eat something in the middle, but it is like so structured. And then right afterwards, I go to the gym, I work out, and then I go back to, I get some takeout food or from a grocery store, I get like a salad or something. And then I go back to the hotel and get ready for the next day. So it's like
Yeah.
you're like a monk.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm so attracted to about this, like the devotion element, like how athletes, how musicians, how actors, like how all of these people who are so dedicated to their craft, like what they need to do in order to do it well. And I see that in you. Like I didn't know those details. That's great.
Yeah, I think it's common for a lot of, I mean, I think I'm a little extreme because I didn't have much funding, but I think it's a common way that biographers are. In the olden days, when only men were writing them and their wives would type up their notes, it was different, but
Yeah.
I don't have a wife, so
Yeah. Board assistant. Yeah, it's all you.
yeah.
Which is another thing, like I'm so surprised that it was 4 years and not 10, 15.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
Incredible.
intense. But I think that's like, for me, I am somebody that's like deeply focused when I'm deeply focused, and um it's actually hard for me to do other things. And I am lucky that like, I did have 1 year sabbatical during writing that book. So that was, and I did work part time during it, but for a year, I had like just like very few classes to teach, and I just wrote.
Thankful for that.
Yeah, me too.
What's another I think maybe actually it is helpful to mention your like physical fitness and how it feeds your writing and your research. Something
Yeah,
I'm aware of, but yeah, do you want to talk about what you do to keep your vessel going?
yeah, my big guns. Yeah, so I do CrossFit. I've been doing CrossFit for the last 12 years. And before that, I was a triathlete, and before that I was a swimmer. So I've always been athletic. It's how I've been able to be in the world. And I find a lot of parallels between being an athlete and being a writer because it's a
Yeah,
disciplined art where you can't really see how to get to where you're going, but you just keep going in blind faith until you get there. It's
yeah.
very similar.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you approach writing too is like I know that you go most mornings, every morning, I don't know. And like every day you're writing, every day you're teaching, like you are it requires so much discipline to do this craft biography.
It does. Yeah. When
Yeah.
I'm in a project, like this summer, I am not as disciplined. And it's weird for me. Like I feel kind of, I don't like it.
Yeah, yeah. I feel the same. I feel like I can get so much more done if I am extremely busy.
Yeah, me too. Me
Yeah,
too.
yeah. What's something else that you think not many people know about writing biographies that we should mention now? Like if someone's in the middle of a biography and they're feeling stuck, what would you suggest as a pathway?
Well, I would say don't get bogged down in the facts. Like I feel like a lot of people, the reason why biographies take 10 years to write sometimes or more is because you will never know every single fact that you need to write a
Yeah,
perfect story. Like you are not writing somebody's life, you're writing a version of their life. And I
yeah,
think for me, that was really important because I mean, I could have fussed with that Steinbeck chapter probably until the end of my days.
mhm,
Because I knew that was where the media was going to, you know, lock in. And I was terrified of what was going to happen. And sure enough, like one of the first interviews I did for The Atlantic, that's what they jumped in. They were like, show me
right.
your facts, you know. And I think it's important to say that to people writing biography is that as long as you're not writing like a haleography, which is just, you know, putting someone on platter and lifting them up,
Yeah,
and you're giving their voice and you're using facts to support everything you're doing a justice to that person, you know, especially if you're doing a recovery biography, which I feel like is the most important work we could do right now.
yeah,
And it's what I've really dedicated the rest of my life to.
yeah. For anyone who's listening, Iris has a Substack called Finding Lost Voices. That's the title. Yes.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And every single post you send out is like well researched, really interesting, and often about a completely new person every week. Like it's amazing. And I do see like your passion and your heart's like desire, your direction is to do this. What the word you just used, I forgot what you just said. The
Paleography,
recovering.
recovering. Yeah.
Yeah,
Recovery biography, biographies of recovery. Yeah. I mean, something
yeah,
that's been around for a long time. And often those are the most interesting biographies being written. Like one thing I haven't done in my work that I would love to do is to play with form.
yeah.
And a lot of like, for example, I just finished that Gertrude Stein biography by Francesca Wade, which is coming out in October, and it's
Mhm.
spectacular. But it breaks the biography in two so that we can see the afterlife of Gertrude Stein and how it was created and what that meant, what role Alice played, and just it's just fascinating. It's a different way, you know, instead of
Yeah,
being cradle to grave, it's cradle to grave and after, you know.
yeah,
So there's a lot of different ways to, or like, you know, bringing your personal story to like my like Loving Sylvia Plath is one of my favorite books from last year, which brings in the, you know, Emily Van Duyn's personal experience of abuse as a way to understand Sylvia Plath's abuse. And it's just extraordinary to see these different versions of, you know, I do have
yeah,
like a Lit Hub article I wrote about this, about how when you're doing recovery biography, or like Ghost in the Throat, you know, by Doreen, oh, her last name's hard to say. But, you know, she's writing about this woman that she can't even find information about at the same time she's writing about losing herself through being a mother. And it works, you know,
yeah.
so beautifully.
I wonder if that's like a sign of our culture right now too, is like the blending of the fragmented parts of our minds because of the internet, because of media. Like we're doing more of that like weaving and like connecting. Does
Maybe.
that make sense? Like there's a multitudinous of access now so that we get to like the framework of seeing someone else's life is always through other things. Like, that's true about all things, but
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I
yeah.
do think it has a lot to do with like, in addition to that, I think it also has a lot to do with like Eileen Sixu, the ideas of
Mhm.
écriture féminine, like that we're writing these stories that have never been accessed before. And so if we just use the limited narrative approach, we're not going to find the story that's really
Yeah.
there. And also some of
Yeah.
these voices you can't even hear. They're not there. And so you have to imagine them into being. But there's like theorists who like are saying it's okay. Like say there's a slave narrative and you don't know this person was illiterate. You don't have their voice. It's okay to
Yeah.
recreate it because you're bringing back someone that deserves to have their story told.
Yeah. So from your point of view, like how do you do that in good faith or with as much ethics, integrity as you can? Like, yeah.
You do the alternative research. So you're not going to find these stories in the traditional archives, or obviously, you will not find these stories on the internet. So if you Google and find the AI aspect, it's going to be all hallucinations about if they even think of these people. And when you go to the archives, remember that archives mainly have been built around the lives of men. And so
Mhm.
these archives are, the main centers are going to privilege those stories and fund people researching those stories versus the stories of women are scattered out all like oftentimes all over these different institutions, making it even harder to collect.
Yeah.
I mean, those are just some examples, but there's also the archival violence that's been done, like very small things from like when they were processing Charmian Kittredge London's papers when she donated them to the Huntington Library. She thought in a really kind of like celestial way almost, where like people that have like sticky notes all over their pages because that's the way they think
Yeah.
outward like that. She thought like that. And so but she would pin things to the page all around it. And so her pages when of her last book that she never published they're at the Huntington Library, but they took all those pins out. They thought she was crazy because she was pinning things to her paper, and so they took
Oh,
all the pins out. So it's like the flat pages and then all these notes, but we don't know where they go, and it's that kind of assuming if someone is different in their process, especially a woman, that they're crazy or that their process isn't worth following. I think that's a really important thing.
wow. That like hurt me because that's how I work.
I
Like
know.
I put just a word or like a link or something next to a scene I'm about to write or whatever. That's how I work and it works for me. Um, I'm thinking about like, yeah, I'm thinking about like Tolkien's process, at least the stories I've heard. Like he looked out of his gourd when he was writing his books.
Yeah, most
But
people
like you
are
said, like,
out of their gourds, like when they write a book.
yeah, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but if he was a woman, they would have committed her
Yeah, they would have.
or she wouldn't have a job.
Even think about when Steinbeck was writing The Grapes of Wrath, this final version that appropriated the notes. So he wrote two other versions of it that didn't get published. So he met her in March, and a month and a half later, he started writing, and he got the notes in March. And then in May that year is when he started writing The Grapes of Wrath. He wrote it in 9 months and almost killed himself doing it. He just wrote all day, but he had his wife next to him who would be typing everything up. And because he wrote it by hand in pencil,
Wow.
and she would type everything up, edit it. She came up with the title, The Grapes of Wrath. Like she was like his co-editor.
Yeah.
So it's different than say somebody who's a woman and working entirely alone, maybe with
Yeah.
other distractions, like you hear of women writing these great novels with at their kitchen table with their kids running around, like Shirley Jackson, for example, wrote like
Yeah.
The Haunting in Hill House with her kid, like when her kids were at school, you know?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Or The Lottery. She wrote that like one day when the kids were at school.
Okay, I can't believe that. I mean, I
Right.
believe it, but I can't.
And she kept, like she probably kept a dirty house, like there, and that would have that. And she's thought to be like an alcoholic. She's thought to be, what do you call that? Afraid to leave her home, agoraphobic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's all of these diagnoses against her, and they may or may not be true. But she was also dealing with a husband that was constantly cheating on her and having
Yeah.
affairs, and she's taking care of all the kids. And she was an incredible writer and trying to be a writer, and in
Right.
that situation, she's still writing some of the most classic fiction we
Yeah.
have this last century.
Yeah. It's the resourcing that is required to create literature.
Yeah.
To write anything, you must be resourced or other things do fall to the wayside.
Yeah.
There was one point I was finishing a book recently where like my house was just like for weeks. There was like one corner that I wasn't going to touch. But I knew that I needed to stop thinking about that to finish this one chapter, to finish the book.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anyone to do it for me, right?
Right?
So, yeah, that's part of it.
It is.
Lots of the most famous writers of our English language had house people, like
They
help.
did. Yeah.
If not wives, they had help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they had both usually. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But it especially, I mean, I look at it a lot from the male-female dynamic because that's my area of interest, but if you can expand this out to, what it was like
Right.
to be Zora Neale Hurston, for example.
Yeah.
There's just
Yeah.
living in poverty at the end of her life. And the
Right.
only reason why we have her last book is because they were cleaning out her property after she died in her nursing home. And the sheriff driving by saw the fire in front of her, like, little trailer, like apartment, and like was like worried that something was being burned of importance and pulled her manuscript out of the fire. And that's why we have her last book.
Yeah. That's amazing. And also the chance of that.
Yeah. There's so
Yeah.
much that we don't get to see because that guy wasn't driving by. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Let's bring it back to your writing process a little
Okay.
bit.
Right.
I'm just thinking about how much intensity and fascination with the humanity of one other person it takes to do what you did. And maybe you can talk on that as a writer. Like, how do you access the fascination or how do you keep it going when it's maybe getting a little too intense, or maybe you are like slipping away from it because you have to do something else? How do you
Yeah.
navigate that?
No, that's a really good question. I think when you're in a chapter, like I'm carrying that whole chapter in my brain all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm spacey, um, living off yogurt and popcorn and you know what I mean? Like I'm not fully there, that during that space. And I because you really do have the whole book in your mind and that you have that window of where you're at. I have to be in that state in order to write long form. I couldn't be in that state when I had small children and I had a
Yeah.
child that had some medical issues. So it's why I didn't go to long form until later. And because I love it, like I want to
Mhm.
live in writing biographies, but and essays are the same. But for me, it is an intensity where you're at, and you come in and out of it through, like, if I get stuck in my story, I'll go back to research. So that's a great thing with not like doing research but processing research. And that's a great thing
Yeah.
about biography is that if you're in the narrative part where you're moving forward the narrative, there's always going to be bumps and questions that come up. And so you can always interrupt yourself, like, and go back and smooth things over behind you or ahead of you. So time is really the factor there. Like the timeline is what's driving the narration, but there's always speed bumps along the way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's makes me think of like when I get really stuck with my poetry, I jump to my novel or I jump to painting, and like if I get stuck somewhere, I don't call it stuckness. I just jump to a different type of task and then I
Yeah.
use my energy there. So like there's parts of the brain that can do like the repetitive fact checking, maybe fact checking is creative though. But like repetitive cleaning up of a manuscript. And then when you're done with that, sick of it, maybe you go to the more like you're like searching in the unknown, and then you go back to like creating from yourself like, yeah, that's what it's reminding me of, like
And
keeping the
also,
energy going.
yeah, and also like, what you were just saying that you'll hit also when you're writing biography, especially this recreation of women's lives, there's something that'll piss you off or make you emotional, or there's a scene that's grabbing you in some way. And so that's when I turn to writing, or it makes me think of my grandmother or something that's when I would turn to writing poetry. So
Yeah.
it's a way to process the emotional landscape of what's going on. And for when I was writing Charming Kittredge London, that was a really important part of the process because when I encountered the story, I didn't know it existed. So I knew that she was Jack London's wife, but I didn't know she had helped write his books and didn't get credit for it. And so when I
Yeah.
encountered that, and it was my favorite book growing up. So because it had a strong female character, and I was like, oh, Jack London's so good at writing women. No, he's not. He was good at getting his wife to do that. And so I think
Wow.
when I encountered that, I had a lot of emotion to process. And that became the first part of my poetry book, Westfire Archive, which erases Jack London's name completely. And he just becomes a pronoun and showcases Charmion's voice throughout.
Yeah. So while you're in the process of writing the biography, you do have to take moments to write poems, is what you're saying. And
Yeah,
then at the end of the biography process, you have also a collection of poems and maybe many more that weren't in the final collection.
so many. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do have a problem though when I'm writing a biography and I'm writing a lot of prose. I can write really narrative poetry that is like it isn't what I want. Like it's not accessing what I want to access. And a
Mhm.
great example of this is when I did my first version of the erasure manuscript of the Grapes of Wrath, which is called Endnotes on the West. I gave it to Forrest Gander to read, and it was so sweet of him to read. But he like sent me this email back. He's like, Iris, I don't know how to tell you this, but pretty narrative. Like, it doesn't sound like you at all. And I was like, oh my God. I was so like devastated. But then we read together like a couple weeks, 2 weeks ago. And I read poems from my manuscript and he was like, oh, this is much better. You gotta send it to me now. So he approves of it now. Like when I was in the project still. I was still in
Yeah.
the prose book and in my prose mind, and I needed to, like I do draft both at the same time, but I do not
Yeah.
finalize both at the same time. I think that's really important to say. Is like I can't have a lyric brain and a narrative brain at the same time for me.
Yeah. I feel that. But this is making me wonder, how did you find or discover your writing voice in the process of writing like the wind? Like was there a moment where like, oh, maybe this feels too X and I need it to be more Y? Like what was that process like?
Yeah. It took several chapters to get to the voice, and
Yeah.
I abandoned the first chapter like I rewrote that chapter like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, I think, so many times because I couldn't figure out how to insert Sonora Babb's voice. I knew I wanted her voice to be at the center of the book and her experience. But I was so fascinated with her parents and the town of Red Rock and the Otoe, Missouri people. And like, it just was so fascinating to me that I was getting lost in it and I couldn't find the voice. And so it was when I was at the Harry Ransom Center and I read the first version of Whose Names Are Unknown, which begins with them leaving Red Rock, selling the bakery, getting on a train and meeting her father in eastern Colorado to live in a dugout, that I realized where my entry point was going to be. It was going to be the day that they were called to do that and then backtrack and go back to the story of, how her mom and dad met. But I realized that I had to start with her and her experience and her connection to the land and the place. And it just took me like several chapters to get to that for sure. But it was very
Yeah.
clear when I got there.
How did it feel to read her written work and then write about her? Like, was there kind of a transference maybe in how she used certain verbs or descriptions?
Yeah, I love that you asked that because when I first read her, especially her memoir, like in the beginning of the project, she writes this memoir about going to Eastern Colorado and living in a dugout. And she writes this whole, an owl on every post, this lovely book. I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. She's written about it. I can just use her voice. Well, as soon as I started doing research, I realized she changed a lot of facts because her life was so hard there. She didn't want the readers to feel, sorry for her or see the abuse of her father or know how much they starved, and because they all suffered from physical illnesses from that time in their lives, from starving so young their whole
Yeah.
lives. And so that's when I mean, so yes, I did absorb like her, especially her way of her sensory rich approach to understanding the land, and how important that was to her. Like that definitely I absorbed and I tried to recreate in my own work. But I learned very early on that I couldn't trust her facts. I
Yeah.
had to check everything. And I think that's a lure in biography that you get where you're like, oh, they know about their lives, and they're lying, or they're writers. They're gonna make a good piece of writing.
I absolutely know. Like how you describe your parents when you're 25 versus 55, like it's a very different
Right?
narrative.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, like, is there something about your perspective or your life that you felt had to change or did change in the process of being so close to her life? This is such a wide question. Like, I'm thinking about my own writing, like how even just living in Spokane, Washington, very briefly made me a nature person because I had to, and something like that. Like, was there a part of your life that transformed in this process?
Well, I mean, when I was writing this about her, writing about the place where she grew up, I was living on the land that I grew up on. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, that's a really important part of my writing process is place. And I live in Northern California in a pretty rural area. So I'm very in touch with like the hawks that live in these two big pines that I live under, and like just like the quail that come and where they make their families every year, and like so my connection to the land, I felt like it made me aware of my connection in a way that I hadn't been, I guess, by seeing her connection and the way she carried that connection with her no matter where she lived. So even when she was living in Los Angeles, she still had Eastern Colorado and northern Oklahoma in her body. Just like when I'm somewhere else, living somewhere else, I still feel this place, in the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Can you say more about that, like specifically about her and you? I just want to hear a little bit more.
Like some of it, I mean, some of this was written during the pandemic. And so I was living in the kind of silence that I grew up in. So I lived here without TV growing up. And it was so silent. It was loud. You know what I mean? And with a lot of time by myself, which I had during the pandemic. And so for me, it was really fascinating. And I was working on those early chapters during that time. And it was just, I mean, it made for me to I had to deal with my own past demons that lived in this place in the same way that I had to deal with her past demons that lived in her places. And that was really fascinating. That was a lot of things that had to be done in poetry for me.
Yeah.
But and those poems are still ricocheting out in my current, like I have a new manuscript that I'm writing, and it has a lot of the work that I was thinking through, not writing during that time.
Yeah. This it just really resonates with me, like how the person you're spending a lot of time with is helping you see something new
Oh
or
yeah.
old in a new
I
way.
find I find that every week I write a Substack. Like
Yeah.
reading The Well of Loneliness a couple weeks ago and seeing all these passages about strong-bodied women and how they were made to feel, I mean, for her, she was trying to show butch lesbians, but
Yeah.
the idea of like having grown up in a strong body in America and been isolated and called a lesbian, right? Or called all kinds of names for it. It was really fascinating. It was so important to see that because I'd read that book before, but I'd never seen that passage or those passages, and how throughout the book, how she deals with her stress is she lifts weights. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God. I was so excited. It's just you start, I think what's really fascinating whenever you're in a research, and I'm sure you have this too, KP, like when you're seeing, when you're in a research project, you see it everywhere. And I think that's the great thing about having a weekly blog is, or Substack, is that they're all talking to me all the time. Like when I'm at the Met, of course, Vernon Lee is going to pop out on in the Sargent exhibit at me and be like, hello, and it's
Yeah.
just, they're everywhere. The Lost Ladies, they're always talking to me. And I feel really lucky I feel privileged to be able to tell their stories.
Yeah. Okay. I just have to check my notes because there are a lot of things I wanted to ask questions about. We should be talking about feminizing the index.
Yes, we have to talk about that. That's
And can
important.
you tell me how you approach it and how much time it takes and all of that and why it's worth the effort?
Yeah. So when I was working on Charming Kittredge London, oh, it's right here. When I was working on this book, I did not have I didn't have an agent when I pitched this book. And so I had no idea what I was doing. And they were like, okay, you're going to have to pay someone to make an index for you. And I knew that if I did that, it would be entirely about Jack London. And I was like, no, I'm gonna learn how to write an index, which a month later, I finally finished. And it's not that great, I'll be honest, but it was something I got to control. So feminizing the index means that you prioritize the names of women in a story about, like, since the book is about a woman, you're going to prioritize the names of women in the index, which makes complete sense when you think about it. So when I got my next book contract, I negotiated with my agent. I said, look, I want that index to be not only funded, but I want full input to how it's structured. And they agreed. And I was really lucky to be paired with this amazing indexer out of Louisiana, out of New Orleans, who that's all she does is she writes indexes. Phenomenal. Like if you get my book, you'll see the back. It looks like a really long book
Yeah.
because the index is so long. They let me have as many pages as I want. And
Wow.
this woman's brain is just fascinating. So she was able to, like, nautilus shell around all of these concepts and ideas that it will really aid you to look at this index to unpack someone's life that you maybe have never heard of before. And also the women who are not even important, their names are in the back in the index. And when I was, I've started kind of broadcasting this idea of feminizing the index. And when I was at the New York Public Library, I went to an event there a year and a half ago, I think, or yeah, 2 years ago. And the woman who wrote The Acid Queen, which is about Rosemary Leary, she was giving a reading and she was talking about her research. And we just happened to fall into conversation together. She's a fascinating woman. But she was like, yeah, I'm thinking about whether or not I'm going to have an index or not. And I'm like, oh, you got to have an index. Like, you need to feminize your index. And like, I interviewed her for Substack, like, I don't know, a couple months ago. And she's like, Iris, like, I totally put an index in my book because of you. And I feminized that index because Rosemary's story has been eclipsed by her husband, Timothy Leary. And it was a way to kind of bring back her story to the forefront. So it was
Yeah.
really, felt really good. And I have an article coming out this fall about feminizing the index.
Yeah. And this is so important for what we were saying earlier in our recording that research is such an expensive process and having those thoughtful indexes helps with research for someone
Yeah,
else who may be looking into this person to talk about another person. It's like work for other people that will like resound for
exactly.
decades.
It's like crumbs that they can follow, to their source.
Yeah. So the labor you did is like so important for your person, Sonora Babb, but also everyone else who'll be reading her.
Totally.
Um, yeah. I just had never thought about the political, social, emotional significance of an index before you talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things we don't think about because we've been raised in a patriarchy.
Yeah, like what is standard is replicated, you know. Okay, that was important to bring up. Do you maybe want to talk about your revision process or how you received feedback, maybe specifically with an editor or that kind of thing that could be helpful for other biographers to hear?
But yeah, no, I think it's important because all of your editors could come in with the same biases, right? Like the patriarchal biases. And I was lucky to have a great editor, Naomi Schneider, and she really believed in the project from the beginning at University of California Press. But when I went into the fact checking mode, which is where you have an editor that's checking all the facts for you, I noticed that they were stepping over the line of just fact checking. For example, when I'll never forget getting this email where there's a point in the narrative where Sonora Babb goes to the 1935 Writers' Congress in New York, and on the way back, she had gotten in a fight with Harry Carlisle and Tilly Olson, and so she drove with her friends to Chicago, and then decided from there she was going to hitchhike or ride the trains back to Los Angeles. It's very clearly in her notes, this is what she did. And it's not that unusual that someone would do something like that, especially from her background during that time period. But this young fact checker emailed me and was like, I'm afraid we're going to take this passage out because it's not believable. No one's going to believe that she hitchhiked across the country. And I was like, what? Like, she grew up in a dugout? Like, I don't think she's afraid to sleep in a ditch. Like, seriously. It was such a
Yeah,
strange thing. Like, the authority all the time in this project, everyone's trying to like undermine Sonora's authority
yeah,
because she is a voice they've never heard of, because she was like, she was not afraid to speak her mind. She was not afraid to do things out of the ordinary that were not following gender norms. And so it was fascinating throughout the fact checking that those kinds of questions came up, and I of course pushed back about them.
yeah. It's like you're saying that people are questioning her authority, and then you, as the biographer, has to like stand firmly on her behalf.
Yeah, and they're questioning my authority too,
Yeah,
Like, I wonder if they would question my authority if I were a man.
yeah. Or any other identity that is considered more trustworthy,
Yeah, exactly.
wealthy, or, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Is there another part of the editing process that you think would be like what was like difficult, I guess, in that process for you?
Well, okay, something that is really difficult in biography is keeping track of all your sources and being
Yeah,
organized. Yes,
right.
I had this timeline. Yes, I had my notebook. Yes, I have like, this tower of books here. These are all Sonora books.
Yeah,
I have boxes with all these, over here I have this giant lawyer's box with all these files in it. But the reality is, I got out like maybe 500 to 500 books from the library at UC Davis. Like and then I was working from an archive that's like 1,500 miles away in Austin, Texas, that I could not see it all at once ever, you know? And
yeah,
so it was so hard. And when you're working in a fury like that, sometimes you forget where you place something. So the hardest part of this was finding all my sources that maybe I didn't take the best notes on while I was in the passion of writing.
yeah,
And that took the longest time. I would say next biography I write, I'm going to be a lot nerdier about my note taking. I say that, but I'll probably get impassioned again.
yeah. The parts of the brain that can keep track of things like need to go to the side when you're actively writing something.
Exactly.
How are you going to approach it? What do you think would work well for organizing the facts?
Um, well, I hope to have more funding this time. I'm asking for a bigger advance so that I can spend more time. I can pay for my travel. Uh,
Mhm.
and I'm just going to take better, I'm going to try to be more organized with my research. One thing that friends have done is when they take photographs, they take PDFs instead, and then they can make them searchable. So that's something I'll be instigating for my next research
Yeah,
trip. But again, it's difficult because it takes longer to do that than just take a picture, take a picture, take a picture. And it's just the constraint of time. Like I have a research trip next week that I can't afford right now. And I'm trying to figure out how do I like minimize the amount of time I'm there so I spend the least amount of money, but also maximize the amount of research I get to process, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you use any like programs? I don't know, like Scrivener or whatever. No.
Yeah, people like those. I don't. I use Word. I have Dropbox, where I make a folder system. Um,
Mhm.
and I use hard like I use the method of like catching a serial killer where you like put on your wall, that all those pictures with string and stuff. Like I do that. And I have like for me, like writing out things helps me like draw connections, but I'm a slow processor. So for me, if a computer were organizing for that, it wouldn't work as well for me.
Yeah, I get that.
Also, even having an assistant, it's really interesting when people talk about using an assistant. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it'd be like, but for me, so much of it is discovery, like happenstance discovery, that I don't think I would ever want to give that up, you know?
Right. Like that's part of the magic. Like yeah,
Yeah.
possibility.
They'd have to be totally in sync with my brain, which good luck. It's so scattered.
Poet biographer.
Yeah.
Maybe
It's
a
not
few
a
things.
not an easy brain to hang out with.
This has been so rich. I feel if I were ever to write a biography, which I don't know if I have the capacity for,
You
but
do.
I feel like this conversation has been really helpful. Um, is there anything like last things that you think someone should know if they're approaching a biography?
Yeah, I would say do it. Like, don't be afraid to tell someone. If you feel the need to tell someone's story and you are willing to put in the work, then you should do it because there are so many people's stories out there that need to be told, especially if it's somebody's story that has been repressed or forgotten.
Yeah,
It's, I can't do, like I'm one person. We need so many people. We need an army of people out there doing this work. Especially now, it's so important to do this work.
yeah, completely. Thank you so much for spending time with me. This is the first postmortem video in the video series, and I think it's the perfect first way to enter this like the idea of like how do you do the thing? And you gave us so many pathways. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for talking with me, KP.
Yeah. Have a very good day.
You too.
That was Postmortem. If this conversation sparked something in you, subscribe on Substack to keep it going. Paid subscribers help me keep the lights on and help keep me asking nosy questions about other people's processes. Until next time, take your time. The good things can take years.